This computer. Hello. So here I am with Matt Carriker, who's been a longtime friend of mine. Matt is an ordained Christian minister and also a practicing Kriyaban, disciple of Yogananda, following the same spiritual path that I follow, and a good friend for a long time. We've had lots of interesting conversations, and he's really helped me understand a lot about how many different ways one can search for God and how all paths lead to the same goal, but the scenery is different along the way. So, so Matt, I'd like to start by asking you some questions. I'm using this opportunity to interview you in ways that I haven't done before. I've recently gotten into my hands Matt's second book, which of course appears backward on the screen, but you can see it. It's a manual for practicing and teaching meditation. And it's because of this book that we are having this interview, because these days, the subtitle of the book is Wisdom from Saints, East and West. And that is really the, the motto of our times, which is that which has been separated is now coming together. And ideally, it comes together in our shared understanding of the divine. And the book that Matt has put out here, which is not a thick book, it's an easy read, he's drawn together many, many different spiritual traditions in order to help us to see the unity behind them, but also to make meditation accessible and acceptable, taking down any walls and barriers you have on this. So, my first question is, how did you ever end up becoming an ordained Christian minister? It's not the career path that is as commonly followed today as it used to be. So, tell me how that happened.
Yeah, I never thought I would be a minister. I When I was a kid, I always thought I would be a veterinarian because I love dogs, and I worked at an animal clinic for 4 summers thinking I would go that path. But um, anyway, I wasn't passionate about biology, and I didn't enjoy putting animals to sleep. So those two reasons caused me to switch path, mid college, and then I majored in economics and soon realized that it was okay and it was practical, but it wasn't where my passion. I was more passionate about like the justice side of economics. And um,
Hmm.
anyway, so long story short, right after college, I did a program called the Jesuit Volunteers,
Hmm.
and I didn't even know who the Jesuits were, uh, since I grew up Protestant, and Jesuits are a form of Catholic priests.
Right.
And but they accepted me as a Protestant, and I did 3 years with the Jesuit Volunteers, and 2 in Belize, and almost a year in Haiti.
Oh.
And so I was in Belize. I was teaching at a high school and living in community because basically there's 4 components that you agree to live by when you're um, a Jesuit volunteer, which are spirituality, community, simplicity, and social justice.
Huh.
And so, you have spirituality nights once a week, community nights, you have retreats 4 times a year. Um, and in between my first and second year in Belize, I had a pretty tough year teaching because I was teaching at an all-girls high school in Belize City.
Hmm. Hmm.
And one of my Jesuit mentors, an older priest, um, kind of recommended to me in that summer in between time, between my first and second year, said, you should really take a week-long silent retreat. And so I seriously considered it, and I ended up doing one in a monastery in Western Belize. And this was a while back, over 20 years ago. And he encouraged me to really sit and pray with the Gospel of John, which I did for that week, along with praying and meditating and spending time in the monastery. And I was also sitting with the question of like, what's next? Like, I'm not going to be a vet. I'm not going to be an economist.
Hmm.
Uh, I didn't know, but I was at the high school. I was teaching religious studies. They had asked me to be the religious studies teacher and coach and
Hmm.
uh, teach physical education. So I was doing all those things, and I was pretty much just trying to stay one step ahead of the students in terms of religious studies teaching.
Hmm.
Uh, But it was really, it felt like a passion, and it was exciting, and I was going to a Catholic church, which I had never been to before. I've been going to an evangelical church where I ended up meeting my wife, Latoya, who we've been married over 20 years now. And so all these things. And anyway, so what I came to in that retreat was um, I want spirituality to be my vocation. And I didn't know where that was going to lead. So I figured, well, I guess seminary is the best next step. I hadn't read the autobiography of a yogi yet. But having grown up in a mainline Christian church, I just said I want to explore this more, and so I kind of saw seminary as an experimental place to, um, see where, what place do I want to use my energies in this spiritual field.
When you went into seminary, had you chosen a denomination at that point, a seminary specific to a specific church?
Um, so the seminary that I went to was kind of had affiliated with multiple denominations, but
Uh-huh.
one of which was the United Church of Christ, which is the denomination I ended up becoming ordained in. But I wasn't sure I was going to settle on that.
Uh-huh.
One of the reasons was, like the church where I met my wife Latoya in Belize,
Uh-huh.
which was evangelical, had a profound impact on me because it was very heart opening in a way that
Mm-hmm.
I had never experienced before in church.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but in the same time was in other ways it was kind of not as open minded to different areas. But I had the converse kind of thing happen when I came back to Massachusetts, which was very open minded but lacking the devotion and the open heartedness. And so I was really longing for a place that had both the open mindedness and open heartedness. And anyway, so long story short, through discernment in seminary and I found Ananda. I found books like Conversations with God by Neil Donald Walsh. I found, Thich Nhat Hanh, all these different things, and felt like, I feel a call to be the change within the church that I grew up in the United Church of Christ, the
Oh,
mainline
you
church.
so you grew up in that church, which is what it took you to.
Yeah, yeah,
Well, that's reasonable. And you just tossed in there when I found Ananda. So did you did you find Ananda in the middle of seminary? Or just let me ask you differently. When
yeah,
did you find Ananda and how did it come into your life? Yeah.
yeah. So I found Yogananda before I found Ananda.
Uh-huh.
Actually, my mom and dad had both been exposed to Yogananda in the
Uh-huh.
90s, and mostly through self-realization fellowship. And so when I was in college, my mom gave me, I think it was The Divine Romance by
Mm,
Yogananda, and started reading it, but didn't take it too far. And then it wasn't until 2004, which is when I came back from Haiti and started seminary, that before I started seminary, I started reading Autobiography of a
mm,
Yogi.
mm,
And actually, this long story short, I actually got evacuated from Haiti because
mm,
this was early 2004 when there was all sorts of unrest. And so I was supposed to be there for another 5 or 6 months. And so I
mm.
basically had nothing to do because I was supposed to be in Haiti and I got evacuated. So,
Uh-huh.
so I had some time on my hands and started reading Autobiography of a Yogi, and I was like, wow, wow.
Mhm.
And I went to, there was actually a self-realization fellowship look kind of space in Waltham, and I went there and didn't really feel much resonance. And I found a Ananda Center in Rhode Island and started going there. And it's about an hour away, so I went there as often as I could, given my other church responsibilities since I was still in seminary. And then in 2006, finally got discipleship and career initiation.
So
Uh,
you're in the interesting position of already practicing Kriya, which meant you were following this discipleship path, and
yeah.
yet still being in seminary to be ordained as a minister. So how did all that fit together in your mind?
In some ways, it was almost like kind of on the down low,
On
in
the
the
on
sense
the
that I call like on the down low, meaning like
oh
it's not like I was hiding it, but I wasn't publicizing it that I
fine.
was going to Ananda. Just because in the ordination process, like as you're discerning being ordained, and you have to go through all these steps, and
Uh-huh.
people are quizzing you on your theology and, are you
Mhm.
a heretic? And so
Mhm.
it's not that I was hiding it, but I wasn't broadcasting it to the world.
Right.
Um, and so it doesn't, to be honest, it wasn't really until probably about 10 years ago that I started feeling not only a sense of like my meditation could use a little tune up, like it was feeling a little too stale and
Uh-huh.
dry, but also like I need to fuse together more fully these two sides of who I
Uh-huh.
am. Like,
Uh-huh.
so it's not just Matt, the pastor of a church, and Matt, the Yogananda, Ananda, Kriyananda disciple and connection, but actually really fusing those two and East and West. And um, so I feel like that over that last 10 years, it's really been much more kind of integrated into who I am. And especially with 11 years ago, I started a new church. And
Mhm.
so, as a non-traditional way of gathering together, it's been a little easier to introduce
Right.
Eastern philosophies and practices than your kind of traditional Sunday morning church community.
Well, of course, in the teachings of Yogananda, Jesus Christ is prayed to. His picture is on the altar. So there was never any conflict in your own heart about it, or is there? Was there ever any conflict?
No, no. And when I was talking to the Ananda ministers, I mentioned that too, that, in
Um,
my as I was thinking about discipleship, and even when I came to Ananda in 2008, I did 5 weeks of karma yoga and had conversations with plenty of Ananda members and ministers. And a lot of people were confused that I would say that Jesus is my first guru,
uh-huh.
that was part of the reason why I stayed with my denomination as opposed to becoming like a Unitarian Universalist, just because my connection with Jesus is so strong, and as imperfect as the church is, I didn't want to abandon that. So to me, it feels like it's being true to my Christian roots because as Yogananda says that's what he was trying to bring back was original Christianity and original yoga, um, and so it feels like it's connecting those Eastern and Western, both in the wider church, but inside of me too.
Well, that is, as you were saying, that is exactly what Yogananda himself came to do. The original teachings of Jesus, the original teachings of Krishna, which is basically Christianity and Hinduism, but to show that the original revelations are the same. Religion kind of wanders off in its own directions, but the revelation doesn't change.
Right.
So it seems just from reading your book, you have a very broad-based interest in many different threads, both from East and West, the subtitle being Wisdom from East and West. I mean, this feels like not unique, but a special ministry that's somehow works for you. Be-
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I mentioned Thich Nhat Hanh too.
Uh-huh.
In 2003, my parents gave me the gift of a 5-day retreat with Thich Nhat Hanh.
Of good
Uh,
parents. Okay, go on.
yeah, I mean, this was with 1,000 other people, but
Uh-huh.
I remember him walking through the door, and I was like, whatever he has, I want some of that. Uh,
Mm-hmm. Uh-huh.
and I'm sure it's probably similar to what I've heard you describe when you first met Swami Kriyananda.
So,
Um, it was this sense of resonance and um, yeah, and that I didn't find that in church. That often I found church, with some exceptions, relatively lacking that vitality, and that's where that was part of the impetus for founding a new community. As imperfectly as we do it, I wanted to create a place where we didn't have to leave our mind or our heart at the door,
uh-huh. Uh-huh.
and where we could practice and try to embody our faith through. That's part of why it's called agape, because that means unconditional love, where that could be the central piece of it, not beliefs or dogma, but kind of living our faith through practice,
Right.
through meditation, and through love, service.
So how does you call this, how does meditation fit into that worldview? I mean, why have you written a book about meditation?
Yeah. So, in line with my desiring to kind of be the change, um, so in the wider church of the United Church of Christ, every 2 years there's what's called this General Synod, which is
Hmm.
the entire denomination, not the entire denomination, but representatives from the entire denomination come together at a different place, usually in the United States. And I was a delegate to that General Synod several
Mhm.
times, once in actually three synods in a row, 2017, 2019, 2021. In 2017, when I was a delegate there, um, this was my first experience of like the full wider denomination. I was like, wow, we are a very active church in
Right.
the sense of a lot of social justice and all that's really good. I appreciate, and that's one of the things that led me to want to stay in this denomination was it's like let's work for peace and work for justice. Like Jesus said, blessed are the peacemakers. Um, and at the same time, I was hungering for, space for quiet and prayer. And so at the end of that synod, me and another contemplative minister did a speak out saying like, hey, at the next synod, it'd be nice to have a quiet prayer space.
Right.
And fast forward to 2019, and which is typical for my denomination, probably similar to Ananda. They were like, sure, here's a quiet prayer space and you can run it.
If you volunteer, you get to do it.
So yeah, exactly. So
Uh-huh.
that was, wonderful, and it felt like it was a little bit more balanced in terms
Mhm.
of contemplation and action. And then at the end of that synod, had this kind of insight, revelation, like what if we were to really be serious about moving the entire denomination and the
Mhm.
what we end up calling like becoming a church of contemplatives in action.
Well,
And contemplation is like this larger umbrella word for meditation, prayer, but also other spiritual practices, whether it's movement based like yoga or walking the labyrinth or art, music, just the kind of wider umbrella for all that. And often I think the wider church has lost that contemplative grounding and
right.
in the midst of being so active. And so it wasn't a way of saying we yeah, an either or church, but let's bring back the balance of contemplation that we love God through all these different practices, and that informs how we're active in the world,
Right.
rather than just being kind of an activist organization,
Right.
and that being our
Precisely.
foundation.
Precisely.
Um, so, that year of 2019, 2020, which obviously ended up being COVID,
Mhm.
we ended up working on this, what in our denomination is called a resolution, which we
Mhm.
titled Becoming a Church of Contemplatives in Action. So at the next synod, which was virtual in 2021, um, it passed unanimously, uh,
Mhm.
because it's,
Mhm.
in a way, it's not controversial.
Right.
It's kind of like living out how Jesus lived. Like Jesus lived a life of contemplation and action. He went off and would spend entire nights in prayer with God and communing with, who he called Abba or Father. And so Jesus kind of modeled that. And so the fact that, like, for me and most ministers I know, that when we go to seminary, we're not taught meditation is
Right.
a pretty glaring gap. Like, why is this missing from seminary education? Because if seminarians aren't learning this, then people in church aren't going to learn it.
Yes. Exactly.
And so I think that resolution was a beginning step of like, how do
Uh-huh.
we begin to resource the church? And that's part of why I felt so connected to Ananda over the years, because I feel like Ananda lives that. And every single Ananda minister or person that I met, yourself included, has kind of lived and breathed, meditation, and not just, the contemplation piece, but how do I live that out in the world in an active way?
Mhm.
Um, and so it's, how do we bring that into the world? And so I was very inspired reading your Light Bearer book, which I have right next to me, of when
Mhm.
Swamiji talked about like how do we bring what he called this movement of inner communion
Right.
into the churches,
Mhm.
um, and I feel like I don't know what your experience has been, if that's changed, but I hope that churches are a little bit more open now than at least what you relate in the book was that Swamiji kind of felt like that failed in the 1980s.
Well, a great soul like Swami Kriyananda, the founder of Ananda, my own personal teacher, Paramhansa Yogananda, the author of Autobiography of a Yogi, the avatar behind it all, if Jesus Christ himself, Buddha, every leader. It's a long road.
Mm,
And often they put into place certain initiatives which may take even generations before they really come to be. but there's a power that's planted. It's like the tide coming in. And in the 80s, Swami Kriyananda uh, created a very strong alliance with a charismatic Catholic group in Italy, which included their priest. And through that group, he saw the opportunity to really bring Yogananda's teachings into the established Christian world without the doorstop of this being from India. And, and because the established Christian world is not looking outside, has not been looking outside itself for inspiration. Jesus Christ is sufficient. And there's great theological validity to that, but it's gotten a little carried away. But the end point being, he dedicated himself and wrote it as it happened, it came together, but he went on a pilgrimage to Israel, and he was a composer, and he often composed according to the inspiration he felt in places, and he received melodies that represented his experiences of the holy sites in Israel, which were extraordinary and profound to him. And he wrote an oratorio, A Life of Christ in Music, and it is orthodox in its theology and also expansive in its theology because you can use the words of Jesus, use the words of the New Testament and the Old Testament to just say exactly what Yogananda said, because all the masters have the same revelation. If there's an infinite singularity to creation, they're all going to see the same one. They're not going. We don't have a lot of parallel eternities going on here. There's just one. So Swamiji used that as a doorway in, and for a number of years, Ananda he presented that music under his American name instead of Swami Kriyananda, J. Donald Walters as the composer, and we had a choir that had learned and performed the music, and we also put it onto a recorded version, with visuals also, and spent a few years really just seeing what we could do. And he called it the movement of inner communion, meaning that the entire essence of Christianity is communion with the divine, communion with Christ, communion with God, but it had become ritualized so that the ritual had more dominance than the intention of the ritual. In the end, he wasn't able to get the kind of traction he'd hoped to get. But I think that oratorio was shared in, several hundred times and found many extremely dedicated adherents among Christian clergy and priests in the Catholic Church as well. So you never know. From little seeds, great things grow.
Right, right. But I was surprised to hear him say that because I know from all that you've told me about Swamiji and all I've heard that he was, he had so many things and did so many things, 400 pieces of music, over 100 books. And
Yeah.
so it was rare for me to hear him say something like this. I don't know if he used the word failed, but,
Uh-huh.
um,
I
s-
wouldn't
s-
say it failed. I would say it
yeah,
didn't succeed at the level we had
yeah.
hoped.
Right. Yeah. But I mean, yeah, it makes me think of like the seed metaphor, which,
Exactly.
I mean,
Exactly.
Jesus told a parable of the sower and, who put
Hmm.
seeds in the ground and some of those seeds land in, thorns and some land on rocky ground and some land on good soil. So, um, like even Yogananda tried doing intentional communities in his life and didn't work. And it was until 20 years later when Swamiji was starting Ananda that those seeds started to grow. And now, 40 years after the movement of intercommunion that Swamiji started, hopefully those seeds are, the ground is a little more fertile, I hope.
Well, I think there's several things at play here. One is the masters come not to show us their potential, but to show us our own potential.
Mm,
It's all of us have a little something we're trying to prove,
mm,
to as self-worth, or that we're not we're not completely indifferent to the to how our life goes. We have karma, in other words. The master has none. The master comes with a job to do and does the job. But one of the things that the master does is he gives all of us a way to serve.
Mm,
And because there's so many of us, I mean, how many hundreds of millions of disciples of Christ are there? And
mm,
how many tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of disciples of Yogananda or Buddha or Thich Nhat Hanh or all these people? And all of us need something to do. And each of us are so different. So this is sort of why I asked the question, how did you come, to decide that I love Yogananda, I love meditation, I want to practice Kriya Yoga, but I'm going to do it as a pastor in the United Church of Christ, which is a wonderful name, by the way. And I did say it correctly, I hope.
yeah,
And
yeah.
because because in some prescient way, Yogananda and Jesus knew that Matt Carriker would be born and he would need something to do. So so you can't really say, and Yogananda knew that Kriyananda, J. Donald Walters, the American, would need something to do. So
Mm,
he spoke strongly of communities and failed at creating one. But by demonstrating that commitment,
mm,
it gave Swami Kriyananda something to do.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, it's interesting to think, in terms of vocation, where to spend my energies, especially, like about 10 years ago, I did another training that was around mindfulness for kids. And,
Uh-huh.
especially I was a college chaplain for about 10 years and
Uh-huh.
really enjoyed that working with youth and young adults. But to me, there was always something just a little bit not fully satisfying when I was just presenting it as mindfulness,
Uh-huh.
which is a little
Yeah.
more secular, whereas it felt much more not only true to who I am, but I think true to what Jesus and Yogananda wanted when it was, and I think that's where I've resonated so much with both Jesus and Yogananda, and that there's the devotional quality to it. So it's not just silence and stillness, which is, kind of following in the wisdom of the psalmist of be still and know that I am God, but
Mm-hmm.
it's also opening your heart up to God, and that's where something like like chanting has been so an important practice to before I start meditating to just open my heart to God or doing energization exercises or yoga so that I'm like not only relaxed but I'm fully in my body
Mm-hmm.
so all these things have been so important in my own meditation practice and it feels like when you got something good you want to share it so that that was really the genesis of the book too. And really, I didn't even set out to write a book, but just as I've been doing some meditation teacher trainings for the wider church, I
Mm-hmm.
realized I think I have enough for a book, and and
Uh-huh.
why not share it with, if the goal is to help resource the wider church,
Right.
um, why not get it out there?
Why not get it out there?
Yeah,
What do you think is the essence of the practice of meditation? How would you describe it?
the essence. For me, it's a relationship with God or my higher self, so God within. So I like to think of it as both listening to God and
Mm-hmm.
loving God. So that's again the devotional quality.
Mm-hmm.
And I know like even with practicing Kriya, one of the favorite things that I've heard over the years is Kriya without devotion isn't Kriya.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just the techniques and the practices, which is as important as they are.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so Um, yeah, so I think that having that, what Swamiji calls the art and the science of
Uh-huh.
it takes a while to learn those tools and techniques, but there's also that art, um, which is kind of finding your own, opening your heart,
Mm-hmm.
um, and having that, what the different tools, like Hong Saw as a mantra or other traditions have different
Mm-hmm.
mantras, or sometimes I call them anchors in the book but
Mm-hmm.
a way of helping you to have some spaciousness between the monkey mind, and what you
Mm-hmm.
do with that. So like, one of the one of the techniques that I heard that I really liked once is like, this is the thought that comes up,
Hmm.
and this is what you do with the thought, and usually there's no space between the two. And usually what meditation does when you're really faithful to it is it gives you some space between the arising thought and
Right.
what you do with it. And um, so having that spaciousness,
Uh-huh.
or even like in conversation, most
Uh-huh.
people just blurt out whatever comes to their mind, and having that arising spaciousness helps you say like, okay, is this thought for me or is it for the other person?
Right.
It gives
Right.
that. Um, so yeah, so I think I don't know if I veered too much from your original question, but
No, you
uh,
answered exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
but I think a relationship with God, listening to God, loving God, and
Right.
then obviously from there, God isn't separate from other people. So how do I
Right.
spread that love and share it with others and with the world?
One of the things that I'm aware of is that the word God does not have a very specific meaning in the English
Mm,
language. So
mm.
you use the word very comfortably, and so do I. But what image is it? What are you conveying when you say love God, listen to God? What does that really mean?
Yeah, I think for me, it's important to realize that God isn't separate from us, and like
Hmm.
it's God within, and so all these images are just different ways to point to. I mean, some of the images that resonate for me are, you know, Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, image of God as friend, image of
Hmm.
God as beloved, and all those. At least I would argue, and most ministers I know could say, but obviously Jesus, I think his preferred image was that of Father.
Hmm.
Um, but I know we've had conversations about this that, Jesus may not have been able to say 2,000 years ago that God was mother, but what
Hmm.
better image for a mother than comforter,
Yes,
uh,
exactly.
which is another word
Mhm.
for the Holy Spirit. And then, the image of God is friend. And Jesus said that. He said, I call you friends. And so, um, but then beloved too, like the Song of Songs
Yeah.
is poetry that talks about this. It's a love relationship with God. So that's another one of my favorite poems from Yogananda. Thou and I art one, or thou art the lover, I am the beloved, and vice versa. And so um, and that's where it's not apart from me. I think that's where it's so easy to get confused with the traditional images of God in the sky who is judging and condemning and all that stuff, but it's not separate from me or from you, and it's within all of us.
Do you find, um, let me just think for, well, I have two thoughts in mind. The first one is, you've chosen a householder life for yourself, which of course, as a Christian pastor, is common. You mentioned being a Jesuit volunteer, and I'm sure there was hope on their part that you'd become one of their priests. But I mean, because I know you, I know that you have not only your own wife and your lovely young daughter, but both your in-laws and your parents are also still really integrated into your whole life. So so does all this involvement in personal relationships and connections, does that enhance or conflict with your devotion to God? How do you put that all together?
Yeah, it's such a great question. Um, and you're right that, I did have inklings of should I be a priest, a Jesuit priest? And
Uh-huh.
uh, as I was thinking about that, I met Latoya, so that was out the window. Uh,
God answered you in the form of, yes, okay.
yeah, and
Uh-huh.
I'm sure I've probably, since I believe in reincarnation, probably had past lives with
Mhm.
those monastic,
Uh,
times in ashrams or monasteries. But I think one of the things that's been inspiring to me about, the Ananda way of life was that, for Lahiri Mahashaya, he was a householder, and Swami
mhm.
Sri Yukteswar was a householder before his wife passed on. And so, um, yeah, so it's this sense that, in and without going into full detail about the yugas, since I know you've got many videos on your Asha YouTube channel that you could check out about the yugas, but that was kind of Kali Yuga, was that you have to go apart from the world and be separate from the world.
Right.
And really, it feels like that is true to Dwapara Yuga, that we're not separate from the world. We're fully immersed in the world, like, school and church and life, and that's kind of the age that we're in, is being fully immersed in the world and trying as best we can to integrate these spiritual principles in the midst of just the chaos of activity.
Right. So do you find having these close personal relationships enhances or distracts from your capacity to meditate?
Um, I don't think I think the relationships themselves are neutral in a way. It's more about
Mhm.
how I interact with them. I mean, a good example was almost 6 years ago when our daughter was born during COVID, and I could count on one hand the amount of times I meditated that wasn't interrupted. You know, um,
Uh-huh.
uh, so so it's and that's part of the meditation practice, is welcoming not judging the distractions that come both internally and externally, which in that case was my newborn child.
Mhm.
Um, and so it's a way of saying, okay, it is what it is, like whether it's family or friends or church, but also like saying, like, no, there's going to be sacred times in my day that
Mhm.
it's going to be just for me, and what are those rhythms, um, like, every day, every week, every year. I know in Ananda they're kind of very encouraging about like taking seclusions,
Mhm.
and in my denomination it's more called like Sabbath or sabbatical,
Mhm.
but it's the
Mhm.
same principle of like taking time just for yourself, for God, and for family as well.
Mhm.
Um, so because I've met many people who were uh, we call them PKs, pastor's kid or preacher's kid, who
Mhm.
had a negative experience with church because the church was like their parents' first kid and they came second. And
Uh-huh.
so for me, as important as church work is, as important it is to share about meditation, like I just love my daughter more than life itself. And so I want to, spend as much time as I can with her,
Right.
and help her to grow in a spiritual atmosphere. Whether she chooses a spiritual path or not isn't, I can hold the space for her, but,
Mhm.
um, you know, it's, yeah, it's out of my hands in the end.
Yeah, very much that way.
Yeah.
Do you does your spiritual life focus around uh, around the personality and the life of Jesus?
Yeah, yeah, very much so.
Hmm.
In the sense of, as I think I mentioned earlier, as I was contemplating which denomination
Hmm.
to do ministry in, and in many ways, the Unitarian Universalist is a great fit because they're open to the wisdom of all traditions.
Hmm.
Um, but I know a lot of Unitarian Universalist ministers who have a strong connection to Jesus, and like it's really hard not to be able to mention Jesus. And I couldn't imagine doing ministry without being able to mention him. And
Right.
um, as much as I think he's got a negative um, rap because of churches,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
it's kind of like Gandhi said, I like your Christ, your Christians, you
Mhm.
know, not so much. That's a bad paraphrase, but yeah. So for me, it's with Jesus, as it's funny, and confirmation class last weekend put a bunch of different images of Jesus up and had the youth go around to each of the images and look at it and pray about it and think about it, reflect on it, and then ask them to go to the image that resonated the most and go to the image that resonated the least. And
Uh-huh.
um,
Very good.
in a way, those are more outer images. But to
Right.
me, growing with Jesus over the years, it's become, you know, uh, an inner relationship too that I connect to in meditation. That um, he's living inside of me and inside of all of us, and so
Hmm.
more I can let go of ego, let go of the monkey mind, and just open my heart. That it's not a separation. It's
Right.
it's kind of like Jesus said, that one of Jesus's prayers that was the impetus for the United Church of Christ was that they may all be one. I think it's John chapter 17.
Mm.
And uh, the our denomination quotes that and saying part of the reason it's the United Church of Christ is it was because it was four denominations that merged to become
I
one.
see.
So
Huh.
that was a more external way of
Right.
unity. But I think the internal way is the movement of intercommunion that we were talking about, that
Right.
also God is one with us and we're one with each other. And so
Right.
meditation is time connecting with that intercommunion.
Do you find that there is responsiveness among the people that you meet within the Christian churches? Is there growing responsiveness? Do you think it's getting better, not, more expansive rather than less?
I do think it's getting more expansive. I do
Mhm.
think in many cases it's what my friend Robert Foreman calls mystics on the margins. So, like every church has
Uh-huh.
a couple people who feel like, those mystical leanings,
Uh-huh.
and they kind of feel a little bit unsatisfied because many of the churches, it's just okay, the Sunday liturgy and coffee hour and see you next Sunday.
Uh-huh.
Uh, and there's not those spaces created for inner communion.
Right.
And so I think that's the growing edge that I'm living into, and that movement of becoming a church of contemplative action and action is
Uh-huh.
living into. It's like we have a monthly contemplative practice and meditation that we do, and
Uh-huh.
it's not a huge group, but it's a way of
Right.
saying, even though we may be spread out all over the country, let's gather
Right.
at some sort of consistency to remember that we're not alone. Like we're people
Right.
in churches who love God, and we want to, even though it may feel like the growth is very slow, that there are others out there who love God and love Christ and want to share that. So it feels like it's growing slowly, but it feels like maybe the ground is a little more fertile than
Very
when
good.
you were and Swamiji were doing that work in the
Well,
80s.
very, very good. And things are changing fast. I agree with you. And it's interesting. I read this book about the growth of Christianity, and it said 40 years after a sociologist, sorry, I can't remember the name of the book, but a sociologist applied the tools of sociology and the insights of sociology for how social movements happen, and he
Hmm.
applied it to the growth of the Christian church. Who was the government? What was the economy? Was there a plague? Things like that. And he said, 40 years after Jesus died on the cross, and was resurrected, of course, but 40 years after he was no longer in the physical body, there were in the entire world, there were 1,000 people who believed in Jesus as he's understood today, which is not very many. And and I think of sometimes as those of us who are beginning to see what's called the movement of inner communion and the unifying of all these traditions. There's just very few of us, and we're spread all over the planet. But it's like we have more in common with each other than we really do pretty much with anyone else. And and it's a web of light that's being built in ways. I mean, I don't think those 1,000 people who were devoted to Jesus could have imagined what happened generations later. But everything that eventually changes the world starts with a few people, or often with just one and a handful. And then, like your experience, I mean, you've picked up a certain thread of a new way of understanding. I've picked up certain threads, and everybody has picked up who's involved, who's inspired, has picked up a certain thread, and we're just all like we're knitting, we're expanding our sweaters. This is one great big muffler that's being put around us, and we're all knitting a piece of it, in this huge long reality awakening is really happening. And I think that this book you've written, Manual for Practicing Teaching Meditation, is a tremendous contribution to it. I'm going to sell it a little bit here because I really think that for a certain family who is looking in this way to pick it up from a more universal aspect, who doesn't want to be a disciple of just one path as they see it. I mean, just so many resources are brought together. I mean, it's just a great gift. It's a job you were given, and I think you're doing it very well. So. is there any last thought that you have? I mean, we're not in a hurry to close, but have we missed something that should be discussed?
I don't think so. Just gratitude for our conversation and for as you said, it's really sharing the light, and that's your huge book about Swamiji called Light Bearer, and
Mhm.
I've heard in different schools like the term light worker. It feels like
Yeah.
we're light workers together and trying to share
Hmm.
light in this planet, and this is just one small way of
Yeah.
planting seeds, and I'm grateful that we can do it together. And
Hmm.
yeah, so thank you for
Yeah.
just all that you've shared with me over the years, and your formative influence on my
Wonderful.
meditation and spiritual journey. Grateful to you.
I travel a lot. I have traveled a lot. I was very pessimistic about everything, about the planet when I started. I'm not pessimistic at all now. It's like wild mushrooms coming up in in all countries. I've been to many different countries, and there's just all these wild mushrooms of awakening in individuals, and every individual who feels that is picking up one thread of the tapestry and just working hard, whether it's raising a family or being a school teacher or a gardener or a hermit or, you know, I wish I could say politician, but there aren't a lot of those, but there's a few. But it's God inspired and God guided, and it will take time, but it will change the world.
Great.
Okay. All right, my
Thank
friend.
you, Asha.
Wonderful to be with you.
You too. Thank you.